Hello, everybody, and welcome to our world today, the Unionist perspective. Today, we're looking at a few topics that we believe start to provide insight into our view of what is happening in the news, specifically related to this popular culturalism thing called cancel culture and how that starts to feed into, that starts to be fed into through polarization from various news sources, from various opinions. And something that stood out for me in all of this was also the link that we spoke to ages ago around trolls on the internet and how that anonymity has started to fuel this polarization and fuel certain things within cancel culture. So perceptively, I feel like there's a lot of nuance to it because anonymity allows for probably a level of disrespect and abuse that feeds into a lot of the things that happen on social media. So I actually wanted to check in with you guys how you feel about just the concept of anonymity on social media and what your view is in how that influences things like what we start to see as cancel culture.
Hey, I think there's something, I don't know if it's linked exactly to anonymity, but we definitely saw like cancel culture was birthed from that, I would say. But then I think it's just, linked to a bigger movement of thought. Because I remember when we started using cancel culture, and it was really like people, I don't know, it was marginal. It was really like trolls on the internet, things like that. But then like the things that we're talking about tonight and the way cancel culture has grown into this negative thing, really negative thing. It feels like it's just like there's a culture around giving a very strong and very extreme position on something. Like, for example, someone who has done something bad once will be cancelled for decades or something like that. Or maybe not, because like we still see people that have a career after that, but there's just something that is destroying their reputation at the same time. And obviously, like, it ranges from actual criminal behavior to like a small thing that people started. But I think there is definitely a liberation of I guess the opinions from the internet, and I guess in that sense you're right. But I also feel like there's a culture through which the tools of giving your opinion through anonymity on the internet are being used. So I agree with you, and at the same time I feel like it's almost bigger than that, but it really depends, I guess, on the things that we're talking about, truly. So I don't know how you guys feel about that as well, but that was my view.
Yeah, I feel similar to that of like taking one aspect and completely making it black and white instead of pulling it apart. And as Unionists, we believe that at the core we're divine. So I think cancel culture is seeing things not from a divine perspective or even believing that at the core we're divine, but rather taking one aspect of it and completely painting that picture as that one aspect. So yeah, it's like a perspective that we are seeing. Like cancel culture is a perspective of not pulling everything apart and seeing what is divine and what is acting not of divine, but rather the opposite of just making that core decision just from one or two acts.
Yeah, I also feel that it's yeah, I totally agree with what you guys were saying. It's also like that I feel like it's a lot of victimization. Like it's people feel or disagree or feel victimized by something that a person says. It could even be in like one interview or if for a YouTuber and like one small thing they do in like their YouTube video, and then people seem to disagree with it or not like it, and then there's this like mob mentality where people come together on that and just decide to cancel this person. And I yeah, it's not divine. It's yeah, I don't know. I mean, unless the person was doing something really heinous, of course, then I think there would be, um, that would be logical, but it just seems like it's more like, I don't know, like entitlement or righteousness or something. Yeah, I'm not sure. Something like that.
Yeah, I feel like part of it comes from like maybe it's a kind of a desire for justice and how people feel like justice gets dispensed, and even what justice is very different often from what divine justice actually is, so divine justice, like we learn from Jeff and Shaleia and from the teachings of the Union, like when you're loving yourself, you don't punish yourself, you don't like see these things as being part of who you are. If you did something that was out of alignment with love, you love yourself, you forgive yourself, you see that you are innocent, you make a new choice. So I feel like the cancel culture mentality is the opposite. I feel like it's very like dawn of human history type of stuff, where like basically, yeah, you form a mob and you're like, trying to get back at somebody. But I do feel like it may come, I don't know if you guys resonate with this or not or agree, but I think it may also come from a feeling of like feeling frustration, because there's a feeling that like maybe social equality or whatever people's sense of justice is like isn't moving the same like dramatic way as it was before. Like, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, when there was like this big like revolutionary time for humanity and lots of social justice movements, like people often idolize those times and the people from those times because they kind of were able to create like a really huge shift in society. But nowadays, it may not feel that way to people, so they might resort to like this kind of like basically find anyone that we find objectionable for some reason, and it might be a loving reason or it might not be, and then just go after him. Yeah, that's what I feel about it. So I don't know though. Do you guys agree with that, or do you think that's
I
maybe
may
more
have
personal?
an additional insight on that, and it's the fact that when I search for the visuals to promote this week's discussion, I fell upon a lot of I guess photography of people manifesting, protesting, and a lot of them said, if you are not angry, you are not like present in this world, or like whatever it was, but there is that emotion, and I think there's definitely a sense of misplaced justice, and I think that's what Me Too was born from. But I guess a lot of people suffer from the absence of justice for Harvey Weinstein or Roman Polanski, when they actually haven't done things that are as things that even remotely compared to that, but like they're all put in the same sack of big producer or actor or influencer that, you know, influences people and has in his realm like women and girls that they influence. And so it kind of it's a little bit sick, I would say, but like there's definitely, for me, like the insight was that there's this normalization of being angry at people. And so we go from that basis, that foundation, that we're angry at the people that have money, that are in power, or that we see they as the majority, as superior than us. And so that includes men in comparison to women, for example, or like a majority in a country compared to an ethnic minority or poor people. And so we take it from a basis of they're different from us. They don't have the same political views, the same class, social class. And so we depart from the fact that we will be angry and will never understand each other. And so if we have that foundation, obviously, like people are going to jump at the first occasion to just like get into this mob mentality, because there's just this thing of like, we don't understand each other. And if two people from different classes, for example, understand each other, they're the exception. And I find this very like, it doesn't feel good in my heart, but like from researching for the visual, I really feel like people have said like, right, we have been living into injustice for so many decades and centuries. Now it's time to be angry until things are in equity again. And so they'll be angry at anyone and everyone and depart from that anger until like they feel that that anger is sated into a form of equity, even if someone hasn't done anything remotely like bad to be placed into the category of like being the subject of that anger. So yeah, I guess that's that. I was supposed to just give a small insight, but it felt like something big to add to the discussion. So yeah, I don't know, Granville, what did you want to say?
So there's the two components that you and Sage have shared are very interestingly related to the component of, and the core of, actual judgment and passing judgment on various things at various times, on various people, for whatever circumstances taken place. And I think it's something that Isaiah spoke to in terms of this almost self-righteousness, or this almost self-righteous indignation. So what is happening is, if I feel that a level of injustice has happened, specifically to somebody who may be similar to me in appearance or orientation or anything like that, it's almost this unspoken call to pick up the torch in terms of that mob mentality. So there's this social justice that's being meted out on social media, and then we find that through the legal system and through the justice system, often those things, while having been protracted legal battles, turn out to actually be unfounded or very thinly evidenced, but they serve the purpose of literally sensationalizing the bad, because cancel culture isn't generally attached to something that has a general perception of being good. So it's kind of this energy of justice and kind of being the judge and jury on social media and creating that polarization through your opinions, through what you post, through what you share, through what you say, because there will be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 people that agree with you in some form or another. So there's like this energy of justice that everybody kind of is subscribing to, but are not necessarily, as you said, operating from the divine perspective of let's understand, let's love, let's make the choice out of love. There's obviously certain things that we can comfortably, as a collective conscious, agree that by a norm of society is probably not acceptable. But does it then also give us license to sit in judgment of the person who perpetrated the behavior, and by extension mete out punishment to those people through our social media avenues?
I guess there's something around what I feel is that, oh, I guess what I wanted to say is that on Netflix today, there's a documentary that went out, and this documentary is just the tapes of the judiciary case and court case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And from what I've seen, it's like just bad. And so there's almost this capitalization on hating on people and taking sides. And that's really weird. But what I see, I guess what we see from social media is that canceling, the act of canceling would be in the process like the very spontaneous reaction of people towards the news of something being bad, that they judge as being bad or not. Because usually when we used to see, like in 2016, for example, oh, he's canceled, she's canceled, it was like the raw reaction of someone to a tweet that didn't please them, or like a YouTuber that said something, I don't know, and yeah, it's just that like it feels like cancel culture the act of canceling someone should probably be something that is very reflected upon, like having a lot of information and something pretty peaceful, like deciding to not follow the beliefs of that person, the entertainment videos, content of that person, because you don't agree with this. But like instead, we have this culture of just going out of your way to hate on someone. And even if, let's say it's someone that is accused of being a rapist, I find this very exhausting. Very exhausting. It's like, it's no longer a one for justice. Otherwise, like people wouldn't be leaving Twitter in waves. Like it's not it's a false sense of justice. It's just nonsense. It's just creating drama and going into a circle, and an exhausting circle. But like the healing from that culture is just the ascension, pretty much, because going into a circle of like hating on people comes from going into a circle of like complaining, and that's definitely something that generations before us did, and the family do, like sitting in circle and like complaining about someone or gossiping or things like that. I don't know, it's pretty much, I don't know, it's like in families of color, it's definitely that. And I find that I have that same problem with, for example, my mom, because the only thing that she relates to in telling news is about like complaining about what happened that was bad, for example. And so it's basically like complaining is an exhaustion of your energy. It doesn't feel good, it feels high, excited, anxious. But we know that basically from religion, like Christianity, say, don't complain, like be pure heart, be happy, but not in the sense of being happy without thinking about why, just like decide that you're not going to go into that energy of drama. And so Christianity says it, and Hinduism says it, and the culture of yoga says it, and the teachings of Union say it. And I think that's what Jeff was talking about, in the sense that people aren't ready to make that choice of ascension. And so there is this sort of fracturing of the people that are choosing, consciously or not, to be on either side of the spectrum. And that's why there can be no balance in the discussion, because like the intention behind one thing is the intention of separation, whereas like the other intention that the ascended masters have been saying to us for centuries is the intention of like just being pure of heart, and knowing that even in times of dire situations of people doing bad things, there's still the truth, and the truth feels good, and we always have that. So yeah, I guess that's for the spiritual component of what is happening. But I mean, yeah, I think what we can see as Unionists is just that it feels bad, and we know we can trust that what feels bad shouldn't be something that we're following. And obviously we have a sense of justice too, but I feel it is different because we don't spend our time like trying to, for example, we didn't start by talking about 20 minutes of Andrew Tate and like things that he says, just almost like as if trying to convince people that he's a bad person, because it's not about that. It's just about feeling and knowing what's the truth, and maybe saying like, okay, Andrew Tate is a bad person. Maybe he didn't do the like human trafficking as we thought, or maybe he has some things that he says behind his foul behavior that are a truth and that speak to a truth about masculinity, and maybe behind the fact that there is some truth in here, like we don't choose to follow him or like condone what he says, and that's as simple as that. And so that's recognizing, hey, there is a part of consciousness that is speaking through Andrew Tate, and it's about like the crisis of masculinity, but like I don't have to vet him to recognize that. I'm not a bad person. I won't go to hell just because I recognize that a bad person can make some good points, you know? And I think that's the core of it, that always the discussion that I have outside the church are about that, like, hey, like, you know, he did some bad things, but there's some truth in it. And what do you think? And it's like, oh no, it's a bad person, so we must hate him. And it's like, well, why? Don't you recognize that maybe there are values that you have in common, and then he's a bad person and we don't talk about him anymore, you know? So yeah, I don't know, what are you guys' experiences of that, and maybe even like your thoughts on like the crisis on masculinity in the realm of like Andrew Tate and everything that happened the past few weeks?
Yeah, I wanted to go deeper into this feeling of judgment because, as Sage had brought up, in the 70s, there was more acceptance to spiritual teachings. And then now we have this cancel culture that's coming up. And it's showing, like Jeff explained, these things that are not uprooted, rather it was covered, and now are showing this judgment that society has for others, as well as judgment that people have for themselves. So it's kind of like pointing fingers, going back and forth with it, rather than having the tools on what the appropriate perspective should be, which is like to view everything as divine, view it as the core. And the same goes with masculinity and femininity, like not viewing it as like these rigid characteristics, but rather having this fluid definition for what it is and allowing it to be what it is, rather than having this strict definition. And if it doesn't go or goes beyond this definition, it's toxic. And if it goes less than what is divine, then it's not masculine. So I feel like this perspective needs healing of judgment.
Something that stands out for me in this labeling of a crisis of masculinity resulting in toxic masculinity, whether it is displayed by a male or a female in terms of characteristically what is defined as masculine behavior and what is defined as feminine behavior, and by extension, what is acceptably feminine and what is acceptably masculine. I feel like the core of it still speaks to and goes again back to judgment. And for me, the basic tenet is that never in the history of telling people who they should be has it ever worked. And I kind of feel like, when are we going to learn this lesson? Like literally, it literally shows itself over and over and over again, and we just redefine the labels or define new labels, but the core of it is still questioning who or what people should be and what right they have to be who they want to be. And why, if it's not acceptable to me or anybody else, can't they be that something else? And you kind of have to go like, when are we gonna actually just get to the core of what we as unionists have come to understand as unconditional acceptance? We do not have to accept the behavior. We don't have to agree with their behavior. We don't have to support the behavior. But at which point does society realize that to be yourself is divine in its own right without the behavior being rubber stamped?
Yeah, and I feel like that's the biggest problem that we have in the discussion of gender, is that people are trying to like sometimes people are controlling and, like you said, prescribing, and they're focusing on external identifiable traits or behaviors or whatever, and they're saying like, this is what it means to be masculine, this is what it means to be feminine, like trying to grab onto that. The reason is, if you don't let go of all of that and go inside and love and accept yourself for who you are, and if you don't let go of expectations of who you think you should be, you won't have a sense of identity inside of you. And if you don't have a sense of identity inside of you, it feels very uncomfortable. And so you want to find something that you can attach yourself to and say, this is my identity. And yeah, that's basically like partly, at least partly, if not to a great deal, what happens when people say that, like when people say there's a crisis in masculinity. I think Andrew Tate does do that a lot too. I think, like you were saying, Yoreen, earlier, about like we should be able to pick apart what someone says and see what's divine in it and what isn't. And like, it is divine to say, like, for example, like, it's okay to be masculine, like it's okay for someone to be manly, it's okay for you to I don't know, have ambition and goals and want to have a great deal of wealth, and how like that pursuit of your passion and everything in the life that you want, how that brings out who you truly are. It helps bring out who you truly are. And he said there's a lot of other things I don't really remember, but like that, for example, like, but he doesn't phrase it in like a very nice way. Like he says something like 90% of men are like losers or something, you know. And he's like, you know, you guys are like just broke ass, basically deadbeats, and you need to get it together if you want to be a real man. Well, is that a loving way to say that? No, it's not. But that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for that. Like the media looks for that and is like, oh, like we're only going to focus on that because it creates outrage, and that increases attention to us, you know, the media, because we love creating drama. Whereas what we would do as unionists is we would, you know, maybe like laugh at the ego stuff. Like you're like, okay, cool, whatever, next. And then you say, okay, what about this piece? Yes, this is good. It is good to pursue a passion. It is good to build wealth. It is good to claim your masculinity. If you're masculine, if you're a man, like there's no problem with that. But then we also, we look at these other things, like, perhaps he teaches men to value themselves in some ways, but perhaps is he teaching that one should devalue women, you know, and thus devalue yourself too? So you pick that apart. You don't, yeah. And it's so weird to, just to mention it before we go deeper, that he and his brother were arrested in Romania on these like BS weird sounding charges. of human trafficking that just ended up being like not human trafficking at all. It's just interesting, you know, and we don't really know what's behind that, but we can like take a guess and feel into it. But it feels like another case of this cancel culture where people are trying to take down someone who they disagree with, basically. And I don't know. So, yeah, I don't know. Oh, and our someone who's viewing, Andy, is saying Tate has accepted that he said some stuff because he knew that it would make him go viral on social media. So he's saying some things like, I'm not saying I endorse this, but I'm just saying it because I know that people will go crazy over it. This is not what to do. Okay, you guys please weigh in and add your thoughts
Well,
and feelings.
I mean, masculinity is not inherently toxic. You know, that's the thing, right? Like masculinity is divine, and it's just the definition of it is all off. That's exactly what you guys and what you were saying, Sage. Like that it has to be, it's who you are within. Like that's what, if you're a masculine being, a masculine person, it's just who you are. It's just whatever that is. You know, if you enjoy cooking and cleaning and you're masculine, you're a man, then well shit, that's very masculine then. And that's me. Like I do like cooking and I clean a lot around the house, you know, like, and I enjoy giving that way to myself and my union, you know. But and that's it too, right? It's like the masculine gives when we're like what it really is, the divine definition, the masculine gives, the feminine receives, right? And you just feel this, you feel who you are within you. Yeah, it's all a part, I think, of breaking down these stereotypes and these, it's all a, yeah, like, yeah, I feel like it's all a part of breaking the ego down that's surrounds men and women, to get to the core of what it truly is, so that we all stop trying to hold ourselves to these external things and just look within ourselves.
You know, the thing that kickstarted all of this conversation is an article that Jeff shared about a social scientist that described what he thought was the crisis of masculinity, and kind of tried to, well, I guess dedicated his thesis and his life and his research to going beyond like just men saying like masculinity is in crisis, and really going deeper into like what people were saying and searching for the truth. And we all know that the definition of, for example, I guess, you know, female was in opposition to the oppression that they were feeling from men. And so women defined themselves as something other in order to bring emancipation for themselves. And same for Black people, same for people from religious minority, same for literally like everyone, Christians in comparison to Jews 2,000 years ago, Muslim people maybe right now. But what he was saying was that before that opposition of women versus men, there wasn't a clear definition of what a man was either and what masculinity was either. So like the opposition wasn't birthed from a clear definition of what masculinity was. It was actually that when the definition of women was created, like femininity was created, and rights for women was created, the definition of masculinity was also created in opposition to what they thought women were. And that is super important, because what we think is happening today and why we think it's important to talk so much about women and human rights and things like that. And maybe we don't understand why men are saying like, hey, I feel hurt there. I feel like you don't understand me. I feel like, why are you so angry at me? Is that we think that there was already a definition of masculinity before, but it's not the case. So they are as much in crisis than women are, and minorities everywhere are, really. And we see that everywhere, in the isolation of men, in mental health, in the fact that they don't receive enough affection and they don't feel their emotions. We already knew that, but I think we're going deeper into that understanding. And I guess there's just something like, it's just reassuring us that you can, like, for example, twin flames, like there is not one polarity that is going to feel an upset alone. Like obviously, like one will have the upset, one will support, for example. But it's the same for everything in life. Like if there is a group of people that is feeling an upset, there is probably a counterpart to that in the other group of people that they feel is oppressing them, and maybe it doesn't look that way, and maybe it looks different, and maybe they have other things to heal, but all of consciousness is healing the same things at the same time. And I think that's what's really important. Like masculinity really wasn't something that was defined before, and that's why it's been in crisis for centuries as well. And I think that there is really like a paradigm shift from everything that we are experiencing today. And I think that's why we have such a vehement communication from people saying, hey, men should be like this and men should be like that, and no, men shouldn't be like this. And because we don't have a clear, like, divine definition, most of us, right? We don't know what it is.
I kind of feel like as we go along, something that keeps on popping up is this addiction to feeling aggrieved. And I think it was in an article that we read about Trump, in this grievance addiction that seems to also be filtering through some of these topics related to cancel culture and the perception that masculinity is in crisis. And partially, I feel like all it does is serve to keep people under almost traumatic conditions. Because if there's a perpetual problem, we never really move past the state of being in the problem or the upset, because it might shift and change its face depending on what is being popularized by social media or in the news or wherever else. But it's always this perpetual state of something is wrong. And it's literally as if society has become addicted to being in that state of something is wrong. There's never really a time where you can say, we are addicted to happiness. We are addicted to joy. It's not, like, I don't ever recall a time in my 46 years on this planet where the whole world has been addicted to joy because there's something fabulous happening in one sense because there's this or other tournament that everybody's participating in. And on the other side, people are selling the World Cup and making shady deals and fighting with people who are not same to them because, well, hey, something must be wrong. There has to be a wrong. And I'm just like at the point where I'm like, at which point do we decide that, hey, there's actually a lot right too? I'm not saying ignore that there are things that need to be addressed and worked on and solved for humanity and for the collective. I'm saying at which point do we also appreciate that everything is not a grievance, everything is not a struggle?
I wanted to touch on what Irene had said about defining masculinity and femininity. Is I feel that there is a confusion in the collective of how to define it, because the true definition as Unionist is knowing that our identity comes from God or the universe, or however you may see it as love. So once you have that core certainty that I'm a child of love, then it's easier to define yourself rather than starting from that point of, oh, I have to define myself. From what I'm seeing, people are defining themselves from behaviors to define their characters, and then those characters become definitions of identity. Rather, if you start from the core of love, then it becomes a free flow of just, you make that definition from your energy of masculinity and femininity. And that truth, that enlightenment needs to be spread throughout so that it could be redefined, but rather grounded in that truth, rather than trying to redefine masculinity through the years, through the decades, through behavior, through characteristics. It just doesn't work, and it just becomes like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting because like in the article, that guy was saying how men are held to like an unrealistic expectation or standard, and as are women, right? Like there's just this unrealistic standard or expectation for both men and women. It's not as much talked about for men, but it's both. It's there for both. And yeah, no, if you're trying to meet that ideal, like you're not really fulfilling yourself and being in touch with who you are within, and that's where the real ideal is of who you are, is within. And yeah, that's what you want to define yourself by, is by the love within that, and who you feel you are inside, and not this other stuff. Yeah.
And I wanted to connect what you just said to what Granville had said about the addiction of happiness. Is once you become clear on who you are within, that you are loved, then you do become fulfilled in happiness, and you get addicted to love and, prosperity and all of the definitions of what love is.
I agree with that. And I think it's a great way to connect to like probably the last topic that we discussed. We mentioned it briefly. It was like the live action of Snow White that is coming out next year. And the story about is that obviously like the main character is Hispanic, and so the article was saying how people were bashing on the internet because she's Hispanic and things like that. And so it went into that circumvoluted thing about like how main characters can be any ethnicity right now because everyone is going to be outraged. And then by the middle of the article, maybe, and they actually address like the other things that people were not so happy about with the movie, and that didn't have anything to do with race, and that's actually like the things that people actually care about. It wasn't about her being Hispanic, about Rachel Ziegler being Hispanic. It was about other things, and the description of like how this film is going to be. Obviously, there was also some bullshit about like the dwarves, like I guess the definition of the dwarves and the fact that they all represented a personality was like not very accepting of dwarves. And I was like, I didn't even put the two together because it's a fiction. Like there's going to be a personification of an emotion, and you know. But there is also something about the live action is that it's marketed on the fact that she is not going to be saved by the prince. Absolutely not. And Disney absolutely had to do a story that was so different from what it actually was in 1937. And what I saw my side on the internet was that people were like, okay, but why? And then I got to thinking about it, and Walt Disney, I guess Disney production company, hasn't got a Disney movie out that was about a love story since Rapunzel, and it was 10 years ago, maybe even 11. And the thing is that Walt Disney, his identity, the blueprint that he left was about like really defining divine love stories. So actual twin flames, and that's why the company was known. But like right now we're almost, it's like it's an insult to be in love. And why can't she be in love and also save the world? And why can't she be in love with someone? And maybe it's not that he's coming to save her, knight in shining armor. Okay, like we know it's not real life, but like they can do things together, partner. I don't know, be normal people, normal people in relationships, and twin flames also, like be complementary. And yeah, I think there's this idea that to be good right now and to trend on the internet and sell of tickets in cinemas, like you have to absolutely reject the idea of love, especially if you were a traditional pop culture moment like Disney or Barbie. And I'm like, what the hell? Why can't we have both? Like a girl is allowed to have both, right? And also a femininity, Snow White's femininity was about, and divinity truly was about being kind and accepting of everyone and accepting of the dwarves even with their extreme emotions. And she's cooking and she's cleaning, so what? Like, it was a divinity that saved her. That's what I mean. She didn't have to like fight with a sword, and that's okay. Some people, they fight with a sword. Some Disney princesses are badass and they rule countries and they open businesses but like everyone expresses the divinity differently, and we don't have to be all about, like, I feel like an overwhelm of almost like there's too much of like this sense that we're trying to represent girls being like powerful, but in only one sort of way. Like they must be a certain kind of powerful. And it's like the other kinds of powerful don't exist, but that's the fairness of Snow White that was her power, you know. That's literally the whole story, the plot. So yeah.
So something that kind of just popped up into my mind as you were sharing that and feeling into what you were sharing. Like the core of it starts to feel as if love itself is under attack. And I kind of have to wonder if that's not why we're seeing this almost a sense of embattlement on so many fronts in life, is that the core of love itself seems to be in a almost this struggle for survival. Like you can have all these other fabulous things, but you can't have this. Or you can have love, but then you're never going to have all of these other fabulous things. And you kind of, like bringing these two concepts together, I just see the profound sense of why there seems to be this battle against spirituality and anything that speaks of the spiritual, because the core of it in most teachings and the core of it in unionism is love. And so if love is under attack, the people that are teaching you the divine blueprint of love would by extension be under attack. And so that would kind of start to give you the sense of why there was this significant almost canceling of Jeff and Shaleia through all that crap that happened with the Vice art, with the Vice investigation and all that other stuff. It's like literally like the minute you become a proponent of divine love, unfortunately, you also become a big bullseye for an attack, because you are literally battling the popular sense of what people can and cannot have.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a good way to close it, because that's been the whole theme today, has been like basically portions of the world that don't want to accept love, like at this time, like right now, just lashing out against it, and that's what cancel culture represents. And again, not because they just because that way is hatred, and that's not love. And so even if you think it's in the name of justice, if it's with hatred, it's not love. I guess that's would tie it together.
Yeah, any other closing thoughts from anybody else? I think that was a good summation, Sage.
Nadia, did you want to say something for closing?
Oh, I was just thinking, like, I wholeheartedly believe that society is not that upset that Snow White is Hispanic. Like, anyone's that mad aside from media. And that in turn has happened to Jeff and Shaleia too. Like, no one's really that mad about love aside from what vileness media shows it as. And then it's like, wait, are you talking about my opinion, or are you just stating something for me to believe in? Like, Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to the team that has commented and shared their views on our conversation today. And to everybody else, please also feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous conversations in our series on our world today, as well as any other live discussions. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.